First of all, if you are a victim of abuse, there are three really important things to remember. Number one is it's essential for you to make contact with somebody outside that you can talk to. Abusers like to isolate their victims. You may think, for example, that your family doesn't care about you because they haven't been calling. Well, maybe they have been calling, and the caretaker, your abuser, simply says, well, she can't come or he can't come to the phone right now. So you may be getting these calls. It's very important to make contact with outside people. Second of all, abuse very, very seldom, if ever, gets better. Almost all the studies show that it gets worse. So despite what the abuser may claim or promise you, the likelihood that the abuse will continue without some kind of intervention is very likely. The third thing to remember is that you are not alone. There are 1 million, 2 million people that are victims of abuse. And there are people throughout the country who are trained in helping people like you that are abused. Abuse can be physical, slapping, sexual assault, hitting, various things like that, restraining, tying you up in a chair. It can be psychological, threatening, ridiculing, and it can just be neglect, not feeding you, not taking you to the doctors, not taking care of you the way you should be taken care of. Now, when you do contact an outside person, you might be fearful of talking to them about being abused. And let me run through a couple of reasons you might have for that. First of all, you may assume, well, nothing really can be done about this. Well, that's wrong. Even if there are temporary emergency shelters for elder people who have been abused. So even if it looks like you've got to be moved, there are places to do that. Second of all, you may think, well, there's nothing this caretaker is never going to change. Well, there are programs that might be able to help the caretaker no longer abuse you, or you might get a new caretaker. So don't think that nothing can be done. Another reason you might not want to talk about being the victim of abuse is that you fear that the caretaker, who you may have affection for because they're a member of your family perhaps, you fear that they might be arrested and sent to jail. Well, first of all, if you're talking to a friend about abuse, they have no obligation to report that to authorities. The only people who have a legal obligation to report elder abuse to authorities may be physicians or social workers. So likely, if you don't want this to be brought to the daylight to the police or something like that, you can control that. But even if the police do get involved, unless it's really, very bad violence, if you say, I don't want the person arrested, I don't want them to sent to jail, likely they'll follow your wishes. Finally, and perhaps the biggest reason people don't like to talk about being abused is they somehow think it's their fault. That they're being abused because they're senile or because they've done something in the past that they deserve it. That's just simply not true. So get over that. Who do you want to talk to? Obviously, if you can talk to a family member or a doctor. In all states, they have something called Adult Protective Services, and these people, again, are trained in the area of elder abuse and can help you. Most of them have a 24-hour hotline. If it's really desperate, you could phone 911. And there is a place you can get to get numbers of Adult Protective Services in your area. You can go to what is known as eldercare.gov, eldercare.gov. You put in your zip code, and we'll give you the list of places that you can get help from. If you're being abused by, say, a spouse or a child, and it's interesting that among elders, usually it's the husband that's being abused rather than the wife, although the wives are usually abused in more physical injuries. However, if you're in that situation, you can get what is known as a protective order. And you can get that from most any court. And they're basically free, and that you don't need a lawyer. You can probably get help if you need it through your area council on aging. However, what a protective order does, the judge will listen to your story, and if they find it compelling, and they usually do, they will issue an order against the other party to stay away from you, stay 100 feet away, 200 feet away. The advantage of that is if they come back to the house, say, for example, you can have them arrested for violating the court order. There's no necessity of showing that they, at that time, did anything violent or anything inappropriate. They will be arrested for violating the court order. So that's something to remember, that perhaps you can get a court order, a protective order, in the case of abuse. Now, what if you have an elderly loved one that is being cared for? Elder abuse is on Baltic Avenue, and it's at Park Place and Boardwalk. It cuts across all economic areas. And it might be good, unless you're absolutely sure they're not being abused, to at least suspect abuse to look for. Now, when you're talking to an elder, don't assume that you see any bruises that they're automatically because they fell down. And if you hear any complaints, don't assume that they're just making it up because they are elderly and grumpy or whatever. What should you look for? What are some of the signs that your relative may be being abused? Probably number one is isolation. Does the caretaker try to keep you away from seeing the elderly person? Does the caretaker try to insist on being there when you talk to that person? And if you keep trying to phone or contact this relative, if you're always put off, well, she can't come or he can't come to the phone right now, be suspicious. When you see the person, obviously look for changes in their behavior, in their demeanor. Do they have broken glasses? Things like that. Just be sensitive to changes. And one thing you might also look for is to take a look at the caregiver. Is the caregiver seen to be over the top, really tired, angry, quick, angry about things? And that might be a sign of abuse. Of course, you have to get the person talking to you. Hopefully you get them aside, you start talking to them, and then they may have the hesitancies that I just talked about in describing the abuse. For example, they might be afraid that the caregiver will be arrested and taken to jail. They may be assumed that nothing can be done about it. They may assume it's their fault. So when you're talking to your elderly loved one, you might talk about that. Likelihood, I'm not going to phone the police, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that. If you suspect financial abuse, that's something different. You should take a look and get a copy or their most recent bank statement, look through all the charges, get their credit card bills, look through all the charges to see if the caretaker is writing checks to the caretaker or buying money, buying things at Best Buy that aren't coming back to the house. If you believe that abuse is occurring, however, probably a bad idea to directly confront the caregiver. You should talk to maybe somebody like in Adult Protective Services, because again, some of this abuse may in fact be criminal, and you don't want to be involved and trigger an incident that you could protect if you talk to some experts in the field. One of the things also that there is abuse in nursing homes. The biggest problem in nursing homes is physical or chemical restraint of patients, that they are just put in chairs and either tied down or given drugs so they don't make trouble. They sit there all day. So that's something to look for. The main ways of dealing with nursing home abuse is to visit often, to be there a lot of times and to talk to the person. The other thing you might want to do is to periodically phone the Area Council on Aging, because they will have an ombudsman whose job it is to kind of check out various nursing homes. And you could phone them and say, hey, how is this X, Y, or Z nursing home doing? Have you had any complaints? And that's one way of protecting your relative. Finally, a few words for those of you who might be in the position that you're a caregiver and you might be abusing the person that you're caring for because you don't have time, you're neglectful, you might hit them, slap them, or whatever. You didn't go into this area to do that. Most likely, you went in to help the person through a difficult period in their lives. But it's very, very hard work to be a caregiver. And a lot of abuse is triggered because caregivers just get too tired, too frustrated, and too confused about their role. You can get help by phoning maybe the Area Council on Aging and get somebody to come in, take a weekend off or whatever. But let me tell you this one thing. It is not a defense to elder abuse. One, that when a long time ago the victim used to be abused me. That's not an excuse. It's not an excuse that the victim was hard to take care of. And third of all, it's not an excuse often used by the children of elders. It's not an excuse that, well, I was going to get this money anyway downstream, so I just thought I'd, dip in early. So again, if you are a caregiver, take care of yourself. Get help for yourself to avoid the problem of elder abuse.